Hi, Roy here. Welcome back to my channel, Roy Reads Anything. And I come before you today to talk about the pleasures and pains and pitfalls of buying cheap editions of classics. Yes, classic novels, affordable, but it can all go horribly wrong. A while ago, I fancied reading Carmilla, the seminal vampire novella written in the late 19th century by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. And, I was interested in reading it. I didn't feel I was going to dedicate my life to the book, so I went online, bought a cheap copy, I think like an e-reader copy for about 47p or something like that, and started reading it. And in the early pages, found things like this sentence: "It will shape but one quantity of the collection of that tremendous guy's." Tremendous guy sounded odd, but guy was a word, slightly different meaning, of a sort of a foolish person who's easily fooled, I think is what it is. Bit of a sort of a figure of fun. So pressing on, tremendous guy, you got "Scantily sufficient owls could have spoke back among wealthy humans at home." I'm beginning to feel a bit uncertain here. Later on, the same narrator, she's sleeping within the upper story of the citadel with a steep oak roof. "I can't have been extra than 6 years antique, whilst one night I awoke and, searching spherical the room for my mattress, didn't see the nursery maid." And I was losing faith in this book at this time. And I think what did it for me was, much to my regret, but I observed that she had died within the C program language period, which would actually make sense if the book was written in the 1970s or afterwards. So clearly my 47p had been wasted, and I couldn't carry on reading this nonsense. So I sort of went to the other extreme and bought a critical edition. So let's see, it's published by Syracuse University Press. You'd think you could rely on the illustrious scholars of Syracuse University to give us an authoritative version of the text, not to translate it into a different language and then back again, for instance. And this probably costs £15 or £20, and you get interesting introductions, notes, all sorts of contextual stuff. So it's great. So basically, on my road to reading Carmilla, which as an aside I would say is really good, I had a cheap edition that was bad, and I'd had an expensive edition that was good. Both of which makes sense. That sounds like the natural order of things, really. You pay the money, you get the quality. Don't pay the money, buyer beware. However, for those of us who buy lots of classics, who have what I call the black spine fever, it's useful sometimes to not have to spend lots and lots, even the price of normal books, on classics we want to read. Maybe they're for an event, maybe it's an author we're just sort of trying out, maybe we're just mean, I don't know. So yes, cheap and good. How do we get cheap, good classics? That's what I'm going to talk about. By the way, before we go any further, let's see what the real text says. "Not so much a tremendous guy as an extraordinary man. There is no C program. They're wealthy people rather than wealthy humans. And the girl is sleeping under a steep oak roof, not an OK roof, and looking round the room, not spherical room." Okay, this isn't the X-Men. Right, it ought to be possible to find classics that are both cheap and good. That's the sweet spot. Unfortunately, there are all sorts of muppets, dibbucks, charlatans and ne'er-do-wells taking public domain texts and turning them into e-reader books and or print on demand paperbacks, and it's very easy to get fooled by some of these. Okay, some of them you wouldn't look twice at them because they've spelt the title wrong, or the cover image is so hideously inappropriate. But then some of them are more clever, you know, so they use weasel words like annotated to make it look sort of official and a bit academic. And some copy the design of real publishers. You know, they look exactly like a Penguin classic from a distance. I've nearly bought one of those once. It's got the black stripe, the layout's all the same, just it doesn't say Penguin, it's something else. So, you know, there's this sort of almost deception going on. And then what you might get could be an online edition with lousy formatting, crappy navigation, or a print-on-demand copy that might be some weird size, sort of big and floppy, horrible layout, stuff like that, because it's a fallen world. But believe me, there are decent ones you can find. So online, there's things like Project Gutenberg, which are very good. Maybe not perfect. I was just reading one where punctuation was just a little bit off, but you know, it's a great idea. They do fantastic stuff, particularly because they're delving into all sorts of things, not just the most famous classics. And you get loads of formats, so Gutenberg, great. But I think my recommendation for e-reader versions of things is to use some sort of brand. Gutenberg is a brand, I suppose, and you can rely on them in lots of ways. Another one would be Delphi Classics, where, yes, you have to pay a bit, but it's like massive value for what you can get. They look nice, there's human beings involved. I really like their what they call parts edition. So for a bit more from their website, you can get things like the complete works of author X, but you can download them as separate books, so you haven't got this like 20,000 page book to navigate through. But you know, however you do it, there are some decent publishers out there. They're one. Again, maybe not perfect, but you know, good enough. But what about hard copy books? If you want a real physical book in your hands and you still don't want to spend very much money, what do? So it's a contested space because, like I said, public domain texts. Some classics are always going to have a readership because they're on curricula. People, you know, they keep coming back, they're adapted. So lots of people publish them and put them out there. And that's fine, that's good, because it means you can do what I tend to do, go on eBay, buy like the cheapest copy possible. Because I like to have kind of an old beta of a book that I can carry around, maybe make notes on, whatever, and it kind of doesn't matter, you know. I'm not really a folio edition kind of guy. I might want to buy the kind of books that I like, more sort of as a collector thing, but that's a different thing, you know. Reading copies, you should be able to pick up. But again, are they all created equal? This is what I set out to find out. That's why I have a hod full of Jane Eyres. Okay, so I did what I normally do, buying the cheapest copies, but I did it for a bunch of different publishers, just to see what's the difference between these. So that's why I'm able to do a ranking of cheap Jane Eyre copies in the order that I assessed them, which obviously wasn't reading the entirety of Jane Eyre, but everything else, introductions, stuff at the end, and just looking at it as a physical book. You know, they all cost roughly the same. How do they work for delivering us the Jane Eyre that we wanted? Well, here's a Collins classic. Obviously it's got this sticker on that tends to kind of harsh the buzz a bit, but leaving that aside, it's got a nice cover. I mean, it's a photograph that's a newly created image. For me, that isn't quite the plain Quakerish Jane Eyre of the book, but it's a good enough picture. The introductory stuff is really concise and spoiler free, so this is more context stuff really. Life and times, Bronte family, common themes in the Bronte novels. It's not telling you a great deal, but it's not getting in the way, and it's not tripping you up with spoilers either. And then at the end, I guess because Collins are a publisher of dictionaries, they've got dictionary stuff at their beck and call, like a legion of orcs. So they give us this classic literature words and phrases. Not like notes from within the text, just words you might find from the old days, like amulet and antic. Text's a bit small. I make it 8 point, which would be the smallest of all of those tested. Okay, moving on. A Dover thrift edition. Okay, now this is like big. I have a personal thing of not loving oversized paperbacks, like trade paperback size. I prefer sort of what I think of as real paperback size. But that's purely an aesthetic preference. The cover is an existing painting. Pretty good choice, I think. You know, she looks pretty Jane Eyre-like. The introduction is really short. It's barely a page. Nevertheless, it packs in the spoilers. When there's no warning, you know, it's just like, here, let's tell you the whole story for some reason. And yeah, and how it ends as well. Okay, and there's nothing at the back, so it's kind of pretty straight down the line, but thrift edition, and of course, size-wise, if you quite like big books, one thing you do get is 11 point text, which is the other end of the scale. That's pretty big, so happy days. Dover thrift editions. Wordsworth classics. These are a bit of a go-to for me. I would automatically buy them. You know, when I was doing my MA, we were advised to get a decent edition. Could still be cheap, but you want a physical copy with page numbers that you can refer to, and you probably don't want some kind of tremendous guy monstrosity. And Wordsworth, I think, fantastic, because they're cheap. Even if they're new, they're really affordable. It's a great sort of mission they have to produce high quality editions, so well worth seeking out. I'm a bit nonplussed by this 1920s painting of a very 1920s like woman. Then you get an introduction by Dr. Sally Minogue, and it's a really good one. Yes, it's got spoilers. Yes, it would be better if they put it at the end or told you that, but it's really well written, really kind of makes lots of interesting points. I like the way the subheadings are quite sort of creative in their own way. Jane's progress. This is not to be a regular autobiography. I resisted all the way. Conflagration. Bertha as alter ego. So, you know, even if I just scan through those headings, I'd be thinking, this looks good. And do you get stuff at the end? You do get some notes, yes. So they've given us some brief notes from the text of things we might come across where we wonder, what does that mean? Either it's like dialect, or it's things that are a little bit archaic, or references to books, and it's just telling us what they are. So this is a great serviceable copy with a fantastic intro, and if you're buying it new, it would be cheap, cheap, cheap. Oxford World Classics. So this is nice. It's got a nice sort of design to it, white spine. The cover painting is, oh, that's where my bits of paper are. The cover painting is perhaps a bit modern, certainly way after the period of the book. I like the way you get a slightly scary eye on the spine. And as you'd expect, because Oxford publishers are to do with Oxford University, you get a decent introduction. Not huge, but it's sort of talking you through the book section by section and other major characters. So basically it's unpacking the whole thing, you know. So if you'd read that, that would be a massive spoiler, but it is really interesting stuff by Sally Shuttleworth. And here the explanatory notes are a bit more fulsome. So interesting stuff, nice book. I like the size, 10 point text, decent quality paper, margins are okay. So yeah, so I'm quite liking this. Chapters are run on, not my favourite way of doing chapters. I prefer it again, being really nitpicky if the chapter's started a new page. These are the ones who mark their notes with asterisks, so you get an asterisk rather than, say, a number in the text to tell you if you want to find out more about this thing, go to the back. And I find those asterisks a little bit distracting just because they're, you know, big and black, but there aren't many of them in this, so it's not such a problem. But I have read Oxford World Classics where it's dotted with the asterisks on the page, and it's a little bit distracting if you're really looking for fine distinctions. Norton Critical Edition. So it's another big one, but I think the bigness is perhaps worthwhile in this case. So what you get here is a very short introduction that doesn't do you much harm because it's really just telling you everything that's in the book. In the back, well, hey, you get, I think it's about 130 or so pages of extra stuff. So almost like a short book about Jane Eyre and Charlotte Bronte is kind of added on. So you've got cool stuff: Charlotte Bronte, student, governess, teacher. You can learn a lot about Charlotte Bronte's life. You've got a journal she's written when she was working as a teacher, stuff about governesses and what that was all about, you know, so context from the time, some letters to and fro to her publishers, pieces by various critics, including Adrienne Rich, several others. You're getting different perspectives from these fairly short but really interesting articles. There's even a piece about Jane Eyre movies and a chronology as well, which I've seen in some of the others. You get a, you know, when Bronte is born, things like that, so you know how it sort of fits in. So yeah, I'd say this is probably great if you're studying it, and lots of interesting stuff as well if you want the sort of lots of ancillary material. In 11 point, by the way, so readable too. And talking of introductions, I picked up from somewhere that the Bantam Classics edition had an introduction written by Joyce Carol Oates. So I thought, oh, quite want to read that. So here's another little pitfall. When you buy cheap second-hand paperbacks from some of those huge vendors, the ones who have, you know, millions of books and they're really cheap, but it's not really led by human beings. To them, it's all about ISBNs, barcodes and stuff like that. So sometimes the book you get is not the book in the picture, or not the edition, therefore. So the first one that came, it is a Bantam classic, and I quite like its sort of pulpy goodness, but of Joyce Carol Oates, neither hide nor hair can be found. So yeah, so it took me 2 goes, then I got the real one. By the way, if you do want to avoid that effect, I know on Abe books you can filter by seller image, that is to say, separate out the ones who've used a stock image or no image at all from the ones who've actually taken the trouble to post a picture of the book you're actually going to get. Anyway, yes, here's Jane Eyre, bantam weight Jane Eyre, with an introduction by Joyce Carol Oates, which was worth waiting for. Perhaps a little bit more personal view than disinterested academic survey, but that can be a good thing. I really enjoyed reading that, and again, you know, it's another perspective. To me, this is like my ideal physical book. I like the kind of floppiness of it. I like the feel of this silky paper. I don't like the tiny text and the stingy margins, but then that's what makes it a small book. So yeah, Bantam Classics. Then I thought, well, let's go for one of the big hitters, Penguin. So, usual thing, go online, find the cheapest one. Penguin Classics, Charlotte Bronte, Jane Eyre. Good choice for a cover. It's the famous drawing of Charlotte that you see everywhere. And decent enough reproduction. The only thing is, it's pretty old. So this is from 1987 edition, and they're still using an introduction from 1966 by Q.D. Leavis, so one of the husband and wife team of critics who bestrode the 20th century and aren't to everybody's taste. And I must say, I think the introduction says lots of interesting things, but it irritated me from the outset by saying, the life of the author of Jane Eyre must be read in Mrs. Gaskell's Life of Charlotte Bronte, one of the great English biographies. And then there's a whole paragraph of saying why you must read this book. Now, I don't know whether it's some kind of Jane Eyre-like stubbornness or Sussex want be druv kind of personality trait, but I hate being told you must do something. And it begins to feel a little bit, you know, okay, 1966, that's a third of the period back to when the book actually came out. Is that still going to be the best biography that we must read? Yeah, so I learned much this day. I learned that not all penguins are created equal. Because here also you've got a small book, small text. I think it's another 9.1, yes. You do get notes. They're long. They're almost like mini essays, usually of about a page each, on various things. So that's Mrs. Leavis holding forth on various things, which is, you know, you're getting a lot more than you do in some of the other ones where it's just a spit and a cough. But there's fewer of them, so it's not so much about, you know, telling you what some obscure word means. It's kind of like, here's something I'd like to talk about. Let's tell you about this and why this book might be quoted in the text. By this time, after all of this, I kind of had the, you know, the red mist. I had a sort of berserker, Bronte berserker, not rage exactly, but kind of intent feeling of seeking. I must get to the end of the road. And so I did something that is not part of the project. Oh dear, missing button. Which is to buy a new penguin, because I was interested to see, are they still using this 1966 stuff? Which they're not. So, if you just buy brand new penguin, you get, for a start, a somewhat bigger book. Not big enough to make me dislike it on sight, but also big enough to give you decent size readable text. So again, we're back to the 11 point on some really nice white smooth paper. So it's a nice object. Good choice of painting, I guess. And now we've got the editing and intro from Stevie Davies. Stevie Davies, who I've not read her novels, but I have read one of her non-fiction books, of which there are many. Unbridled Spirits. Unbridled Spirits. Women of the English Revolution, 1640 to 1660, which I really recommend if you want to read about radicals, prophets and peace women during that turbulent time when, you know, everything was kind of up for grabs in revolutionary England. Really, really good read. She's also like a massive Bronte scholar and that kind of thing, so ideal choice. And yes, as you'd expect, her intro is really good, really exciting, full of ideas. There's political perspective, agenda perspective, there's also problematic stuff needs to be surfaced. And here we go, at last, at last, at last. New readers are advised that this introduction makes the details of the plot explicit. So you are advised to move directly onto the text if you don't want to know the plot in advance. And you get one of those chronologies, dead handy. Text of the book, obviously. Chapters start their own page. And the notes are informative and fairly plentiful, so yeah, good stuff. So another thing I learned was that in a way I've completely wasted my time, because this didn't cost much more than the cheap editions, so I could have got what has actually become my ideal edition from the beginning. But in terms of ranking, I would put this as number 1 as the best all-rounder. Norton Critical Edition I'd put as a sort of number 2, he's slightly bigger, and certainly as the sort of best for students one. Best value would be Wordsworth, where you get everything you'd want in the most affordable edition. Then most of the others I'd say are pretty much a muchness. I mean, obviously you're getting the main thing you want, which is Jane Eyre. I would kind of put Collins at the bottom of the heap. It's just not a nicely set out book. The introductory stuff is so minimal that it's almost not worth having. I don't really feel we're on solid ground with statements like, following in the footsteps of Jane Austen, the Bronte sisters were the next generation of female writers. There were other female writers. Are they in the footsteps of Jane Austen with things like Wuthering Heights? So that's my ranking. So I hope that's useful. Personally, I do think it's fun just finding any old edition of these books. I do plan to read Jane Eyre again, having read those introductions and been re-excited by the book, as well as the ones I've ranked at the top. I have a fondness for this Bantam edition as the sort of kind of book I like to have, you know, which is another factor. Okay, so that's all for me on the strange world of buying classics. I'll be back soon with something else.